You're listening to the Future Tech Podcast with Richard Jacobs. Future technologies such as artificial intelligence, stem cells, 3D printing, gene editing, Bitcoin, blockchain, the microbiome, quantum computing, virtual reality, and exploring space are much closer than you might think. In fact, many early versions of these technologies are in play right now, and the companies that are using these technologies are the focus of this podcast. My goal for you, the listener, is to learn from these podcasts. You may very well learn something that may change the course of your life for the better, steer you towards a new career, or give you insight into addressing a thorny medical problem. Remember, this podcast and its content is informational in nature only. No medical, tax, legal, financial, or psychological advice is being given. If you enjoyed the podcast, please listen, subscribe, like, and tell your friends about it. Thank you. Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Future Tech and Future Tech Health podcast. I have Dr. Eric C. Westman. He's an MD in MHS, internal medicine doctor. He's also an associate professor of medicine and the director of the Duke Lifestyle Medicine Clinic. He's board certified in internal medicine and obesity medicine, and he has a master's degree in clinical research. So, Dr. Westman, thanks for coming. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Yeah, so before we jump in, I know that you're one of the speakers at the upcoming Metabolic Health Summit. It happens very end of January, beginning of February. So I'm glad to see that you'll be there. We're going to go over your work today here on the phone, but can you give people, listeners, just the basic title or topic of your talk at the Metabolic Health Summit? What are they going to hear about there?
Sure. I'll be giving a talk with a title, something to the effect of the keto diet, the clinical implementation, and research frontiers. Have you heard of the keto diet lately? It was the most popular research term over the last couple of years for diet. It's been amazing to see.
Yeah, no, I've experimented with a version of it, not the strict version, and I've interviewed quite a few people that are talking about it. So the topic's going to be really well received for sure, definitely.
Yeah. So this meeting that is the third meeting that will bring together clinical and research and basic research at the animal level, even theoretical models and test tube research, all pretty much around what happens when a human doesn't, or other animals don't eat carbohydrates, which is now under the name of a keto diet. But we've been studying this back now going on 20 years without carbohydrate in the human diet. It's pretty interesting what can happen.
Well, I guess some of the really interesting things too is now there's exogenous ketones. So some people I know are continuing to have either low carb or high carb and using exogenous ketones, and who knows what that's going to do, or maybe you do know what that's going to do to the human body when you're combining those two unusual things.
Yeah, so my research as an internal medicine and obesity medicine doctor has been mainly in the context of cutting out carbohydrates and letting the body itself generate its own ketones. What is exciting and novel is the idea of exogenous ketones, meaning your body doesn't make them. That would be endogenous. So exogenous means it comes from outside. And it's fascinating to see. You definitely can. So one of the first breakthroughs of the old thinking was, you can't drink or consume ketones. The stomach will break them down and it won't do any good, or you won't even generate a ketone level. And that's been shown to be true, that you can increase the body's ketone levels by consuming ketone in the food or the drinks. And so that was the first breakthrough that, again, it's pushing the envelope of what we thought held to be true for so long. And then whether ketones, drinking them, help you lose weight or not better is an open question still. And I'm actually looking forward to the latest research in different contexts at this meeting coming up at the end of January.
Right, that's great. Excellent. Well, I know that your research appears to focus pretty heavily on obesity. Maybe we can take a quick step back. Why the interest in obesity? I know it's unfortunately super prevalent. Myself, I'm not the skinniest person by far, and I see it everywhere. So why do you choose to focus in this area, first of all?
Yeah, so my background is in internal medicine and clinical research in internal medicine. So I learned how to do clinical trials, designed my own, did my own data analyses and publications. And I started at Duke University now going back 20 years ago, 28 years ago now. And so my interest was, back 20 years ago, everyone thought eating fat and not eating carbohydrates would necessarily kill you. I mean, it was thought to be like you were on the edge of a cliff kind of danger, going to kill you. Well, it was clear to me that that wasn't the case, because two of my patients came in having done, back then it was called Atkins induction, done the Atkins diet, and they lost all this weight. And, so it clearly worked. The concerns that we had then were about safety. And so Dr. Atkins, Dr. Eads, who were protein power, Dr. Bernstein, all these doctors were using a keto type diet, but they were thought to be quacks. And I think the main issue was not that it couldn't work, it was just, was it safe? And so we started looking at the keto diet starting in 1998 in terms of safety. And what we found pretty quickly is that no, everyone did not die, like on the edge of a cliff, or even it's not that level of danger. It's more of a side effect. Some people might get fatigue and cravings early on. And then what's fascinating is over the next ensuing 20 years, the more you study people not eating carbohydrates, the better it looks. So that it starts with obesity, because in the big picture, what happens is your body starts burning its own fat when you don't eat carbohydrate. It's just because we store energy on our bodies as fat. But no one thought that, it was going to be a good thing to eat fat. So we would always eat carbs. And so it was a big shift in mentality to just think, well, no, I just want the body to burn fat. And that's why it was being applied to obesity, which is a condition of too much fat, too much adipose tissue, really too much energy stored on the body. And the way to get your body to start burning fat, well, one way is to not eat carbohydrates. Another very effective way is to not eat anything at all. And all you have to do is look on a reality TV show where people go out and they don't eat anything. I mean, they turn into fat-burning machines and they lose weight, sometimes up to a pound a day. And so we don't think that's a safe thing to do. So in the obesity medicine world, we want to optimize and make it as safe as possible. The idea of burning fat to lose the body fat and to fix obesity, and that's why it really started as a obesity treatment and still continues today. I just as an aside, one of the reasons we have obesity to such a great degree today is that one of the influences was a governmental guideline came out in the 1970s that said eating carbohydrate was healthy and eating fat was bad. And it was not evidence-based at all. There was no science behind it. And so the companies that made these foods that didn't have the fat in it, that had a lot of carbs in them. And so now we have the biggest diabetes and obesity epidemic that there's ever been. And it turned out that there was sort of a governmental industry working together to sell the foods that, the wheat and the corn that America makes, and without regard to the downstream consequences. So, but obesity is the first no-brainer that the keto diet is good for. And then, of course, type 2 diabetes, meaning elevated blood sugar all day long, is very effectively treated by not eating sugar. And, that's the other kind of why did we not think about this? So when one of my patients that I see a wide range in a private practice within a university. I see a wide range of educational levels and all that. The fat burning idea is a little harder to teach, but the idea that eating or drinking sugar raises your blood sugar and diabetes is a problem of elevated blood sugar is very simple to teach. So I basically don't want people to eat or drink things that raise the blood sugar. And why that's so difficult for even doctors today to understand is it's a whole nother, there are books written about this now as to how the idea, the science was weak, and the governmental and industry products that were developed were basically to make you addicted to the food. And anyway, it's long story short, it can be fixed by just stopping the carbohydrate consumption, which is now known as the keto diet.
Well, I wanted to ask you some more advanced questions on keto, because I've spoken to a lot of people, and the basics of it seem to be pretty clear. But I wanted to ask you, since you've studied it for so long and probably in such detail, what do the outliers of it look like? For instance, are there people where the keto diet just doesn't seem to have any effect on their weight? Or, are there any unusual metabolic instances you've run across? Again, it works for a lot of people. I'm sure, unfortunately, nothing seems to work for everybody. So maybe it's in those areas, again, the fringes, that maybe you found some interesting findings.
Yeah, well, I think that's the next evolution of the science and research about the keto diet. The idea that it will be harmful for everyone, well, that's just not true. That's established. In fact, it's therapeutic and beneficial for many, many people. Probably the majority of Americans who have obesity or overweight or diabetes. So when you're looking at the fringe, pushing the envelope, what I observe is that you have to be very careful about whether someone's actually doing it or not. Are you in a metabolic ward with a human where they have no ability to eat anything other than what you've asked them to eat? Because in my world, in the clinical medical world, you just can't believe what people tell you. I mean, it's not that they're often with addiction, there's denial, and even people aren't honest with themselves. So I have yet to really see someone have it not work for weight loss when they're doing it correctly. And now that's the whole big asterisk, because you have to learn how to do it correctly. And the people coming into the world now thinking that you have to drink oils and butters and to ramp your ketones up when they're trying to burn their own body fat is a big mistake. So I'll see people, the first thing I do is if someone comes to me as a specialist, I'll sit down for about 45 minutes, take a long medical history and diet history and say, well, what did you do? And someone says keto diet. I say, okay, well, tell me exactly what you ate and drank. Ideally they would bring in their food records and even ketone measurements of in some way, but a lot of people won't do that. And so when you teach someone correctly, the appetite goes down and they start burning their body fat. And I haven't seen that not work in anyone. So I'm going to correct you. This probably will work for everyone. And that goes to the idea of going out into the deserted island and not eating anything. That will work for anybody. Right. And the tough thing is in today's world where there's just food everywhere and you have temptations and all that. And then, you think you're eating. I erase in people's minds the idea that they need to eat. I mean, it's just bizarre how someone will come to me. It's like they feel they have to top off their gas tank every few hours to keep it full when the gas tank's already full, So anyway, there's a lot of unlearning, social eating, and that sort of thing. So I think it will work for everyone. Now, whether everyone wants to do it's another big issue, and I don't push it on everyone. I understand not everyone wants to do it, and that's fine. There are a lot of ways to go about managing health, and until there's more science wrapped around keto is definitely better in a human kind of study paradigm. I'm really kind of looking and just being open-eyed. I don't think we have the data to say everyone should be doing it, but it's looking better and better all the time, rather than looking worse and worse all the time.
Well, you mentioned people that are consuming lots of oil. So I have a question. A few researchers have said, well, you still do have to watch calories. If you have too many calories, and especially if you're consuming lots of fat calories directly, that it can stop any weight loss. It'll keep you where you're at. So what do you see situations where someone is actually adhering moderately to the keto diet, but maybe they're consuming an excess of calories or an excess of fat directly? They're drinking oils, like you said, coconut oil, olive oil, having tons of fat. Would that stop their weight loss? What about those situations?
Yeah, so put me in the camp of those who think calories matter and that you can overconsume calories, including fat calories, and not lose weight on a keto diet, because that's what I see in my clinical practice. And now, in formal research studies that have gone through peer-reviewed publications, there are zero. studies. So we're all kind of using our best intuition, what we see in our practices. In fact, there's the science is at the level of an individual. His name is Sam, who lives in the UK, who put himself on a 5,000 calorie per day diet of different macronutrient compositions, and he actually gained weight on a keto diet. Of course, so that's one human and one metabolism, but calories do matter, and the interesting thing is that they don't behave the same depending on the food they come from. So there's a metabolic cost of burning calories if you're eating proteins and fats, when sugar calories really just comes just with energy, and there's no very less metabolic expense to burn them. Of course, when you step back, the nutritional value of something that just says sugar or starch is also biologically almost nil. I mean, there's no protein, there's no fat, which are really the essential nutrients that the human body needs. So it put me in the camp of those who still believe calories matter. It's just that it's not as easy to calculate as we've been led to believe.
Well, perhaps the keto diet's more tolerance. I mean, so for regular diets, the thinking seems to be, you need to be in a caloric deficit in order to lose weight. Is that, in your just observations, is that true with keto, or is it more tolerant where you could be at, you're getting the calories that you need metabolically, maybe you're even at a slight surplus and it still works, or do you have to be at a deficit as well?
Well, when you talk about a caloric deficit, I'm assuming you're including the metabolism speed and the amount you're burning through exercise. So if all of those things are held and considered, well, the recent science, and this is David Ludwig at Harvard, shows that you can actually eat more calories and lose weight, the same amount of weight. I mean, we knew this back when Steve Friedland and John Mervopoulos was doing they were doing a study here at Duke looking at cancer. They had to feed the animals more food to keep the weight the same if they were doing a low carb keto diet. So you either choose to keep the calories the same and let the weight go down with the animals, or you keep the weight the same and feed the animals more. So you can't accomplish both. So I guess what I'm trying to say is the metabolic rate goes down, but it goes down less when you're losing weight on a keto diet. So there's actually a small metabolic advantage, is the term that's been used for ages, and it does exist. It's not the main reason why people lose weight. They clearly eat less than before in the clinical trials that we've done, again, when they're taught properly. And we've never asked people to drink fats, and that's something new that needs to be studied formally. I would love to help do that study, actually, consulting, or do it myself, where we look at a current keto teaching sort of diet, let you have drink oils and butters and versus the classically low carb, but don't add fats, and to see which one works better. Calories matter, and you do need a caloric deficit. It's just that how things change depending on what you eat. And the keto diet looks to be better. Let me put this all in one phrase. Yeah, you can probably eat more and lose weight on a low carb keto diet than on other diets because of all of these things happening.
Okay. And what if you're someone that, let's say you've had your gallbladder removed, or for some reason metabolically you're just not good at breaking down fats? Would that present a challenge to the keto diet? And what would you do in those circumstances?
Yeah, in my experience, the gallbladder being there or not doesn't matter. So that unless you're really, again, if you're drinking lots of fats and oils, you might get nausea and stomach upset, which I do not see in people who don't drink oils. If you're generating ketones from your own body fat, you wake up in the morning and you're just not hungry, and you don't have to add in these things. So you could be drinking too many oils and overcome the lack of gallbladder bile. It's a amount that's accumulated, and then it squirts out timed with the meal so that you digest the fats better. But if you're just eating real foods in a low carb keto way, I don't see having a gallbladder as necessary at all. And I know a lot of people come in with that thing that thinking that it's bad, and I don't see that. Even after Roux-en-Y gastric bypass surgery, where the stomach is made about as big as a hen's egg, and then the intestines are rerouted so that the timing of the gallbladder secretions really have no relation to when someone's eating something. Even a keto diet does well in that context as well. And so, another frontier that I'm working on, because I get a clinical population where other doctors are sending me their most difficult patients. We've used a keto diet in people who have heart failure and have a implanted heart pump, who are on warfarin and anticoagulation and have to have sodium restriction, and they do well, and the doctors need them to lose weight before their heart transplant. And so they don't want to add in a new medicine or do an operation. And so the idea that you can manipulate the food and these other medical, even very seriously ill medical populations is pretty neat. And that's one of the frontiers that I'm pushing, in that there are other doctors who want to operate on the knee or the hip or something, but people are too heavy and they want to do something that's relatively safe. And so we've developed a rather simple, safe protocol with monitoring. If someone's on medication, it requires the doctor or nurse practitioner or physician assistant to understand those medical problems. But having a gallbladder or not doesn't matter. I mean, and if someone thought it might be a problem, I teach them what to do. And then it's not just a snapshot. In my world, I have people come back and we talk about what they're doing. There might be some mid-course corrections that happen. For example, in someone who couldn't tolerate all of the meals, meal size, we would have them eat less food, but more frequently. I mean, so there are certain fixes that we use just as empirically in certain individuals.
You work with patients that, let's say they have diabetes and maybe they're on drugs like metformin or statins or things like that, and do they end up combining that with the keto diet, or do you prefer to just have them just do dietary intervention and not combine it with any other drugs?
Well, if someone comes to me, my ideal spot to intervene for diabetes is before they're put on any medication. And every patient should be given a choice. You can go the medication route, but what happens there, most people will gain weight and they'll have diabetes forever. Or you can do a lifestyle route, and keto is just one of many lifestyles where if you intervene early, you can actually reverse the diabetes without medication at all. But I'm thrown into a medical world where the typical patient that I see is on insulin and metformin for the diabetes, sometimes hundreds of units of insulin. They're on antihypertensives, often 2 or 3 antihypertensive blood pressure medicines, so we have to monitor that. They're on statins the statins are a minor thing when it comes to the medical de-prescribing of all of these things in a clinical context. So, that's a whole different world of health optimization. And do you want to worry about cholesterol when you have no arterial disease at all? I think that's a big distraction. What you want to do is to keep the blood sugar down and keep the carbs as low as you can, thinking generally as an internist now, and when you're trying to reduce or prevent chronic long-term issues that face us today.
And then do you have patients that will lose weight for a time and then stall out and stop losing weight even though they may have a lot more weight to go? Is that a common scenario? Or
Yeah, so when we looked at our clinical sample, I treated about 5,000 people. We have more data on 2,000 people over the last 5 years. The average BMI or body mass index is 35, which means most people have between 100 and 150 pounds to lose to become a normal weight. Just to give you an idea of the world I'm in, it's like going to a battle zone, in a war zone to learn how to do surgery, So yeah, stalls can happen, although on a keto low carb diet, the most common reason for a stall early on is that carbs start creeping back in. And even if you get information in books that are written, even a book that I was on called The New Atkins for a New You, I'm one of the authors on that. We taught back then, and it's been 8 years since that came out, that you would want to gradually increase the carbs. I'm not so sure that's true anymore. And in my clinic, I keep people as low as they can on the carbs as long as they can comfortably. And there's a subset of folks who just find this is a great way to live. they don't really miss things or they find substitutes. But the most common cause for a stall is eating more carbs. The next most common reason is a metabolic rate reduction internally, where you're not automatically reducing what you're eating over time. You're basically going to cut down your metabolic rate. And sometimes I have to help behaviorally to say, well, look, do you have to eat 3 times a day? Are you eating out of hunger or habit? It's okay to eat once a day. I'll give it a name, intermittent fasting. It's all the rage. It's kind of funny when people ask me, is it okay to intermittent fast? I say, well, if you're eating really good foods like proteins and fats and a keto lifestyle, and you're not hungry and you eat once a day, of course that's fabulous. If you want to call it intermittent fasting, great, and put a name on it. But it's just kind of silly that I have to have people unlearn that. I don't have to fuel myself by eating every hour. No, because you're running on your body fat.
Oh, yeah, people like to give names to stuff. Everyone does, and it makes sense. When you talk about keeping people low carb, can you put some general numbers to it? Like, there's like an Atkins-like or an Atkins mimicking diet or a keto-esque diet, I guess you could say. The strict keto appears to be, from what I've heard, 80% fats and, the rest is protein and almost zero carbs. I've heard numbers bandied about like 20 grams of carbs a day or 30 grams of carbs. So what are some of the levels or metrics that you use with patients that show them success?
Sure. So in my clinical research that we started 20 years ago, we contacted the doctors who were using it clinically, and Dr. Atkins started at 20 grams, total grams or less for the day. Dr. Eads, Dr. Mary Dan and Mike Eads wrote Protein Power, and they used 20 grams total for the whole day. So the practitioners at the time found out by trial and error that 20 grams or less, and of course this is Americans living from 1970 to 2000, with whatever they were eating at the time and lifestyle and all. And they kept people at 20 grams or less, wrote it in their books and used that in their clinical practices. We borrowed Dr. Atkins' method to do our own clinical research down at Duke University. And so what we studied was the 20 gram. And we were one of the only, Will Yancey, Dr. Yancey and I are one of the initial researchers who studied this diet. And we thought as physicians, well, let's talk to other physicians who've used it. Maybe we can learn something. And so that's where we came up with the 20 total carbs. It wasn't us doing 20, then 30, then 50, then 100. Every other researcher that I'm aware of that at the time had no experience using a low-carb diet, and they never talked to a doctor who used a low-carb diet. They thought they were quacks. So they had to come up with their own method. In fact, one of the researchers that just published in the last year out of Stanford came up with a strange methodology of, well, we'll let people figure out how many carbs they think they can eat, and then that'll be what we have people do, which is totally not a clinical idea. So, how people come to this 20 grams was if you want it to work for everyone, and that, as a doctor, someone comes to me, they want it to work. I don't say, well, you can start at 50, and then if it doesn't work, go down to 40. And I say, look, start at 20, it's going to work. See how you do, and then add back if you need to. But, most people, if you like meat, poultry, fish and shellfish and eggs and cheese and veggies, most people find that kind of lifestyle pretty palatable if it's, taught in the right way. So I don't know. That's another area for research. What is the limit of carbs that an individual can have? Of course, Dr. Atkins' answer was go out and get some strips for the urine or strips for the blood and find your own keto threshold. But even that idea has never been tested formally in a large-scale clinical trial to know if someone does that, will they actually do better than someone who just keeps carbs low. So we're kind of in that area of the clinical lore of how to do it needs to be honed down and fine-tuned in clinical trials, or you just do it one-on-one with a given patient who's in front of you.
What have you seen? What's the stall amount of carbs? And I know it varies for different people, but is there a range at which it appears to stall the person's progress or reverse it?
Well, when I look at the daily intake of carbohydrate, many dietitians are kind of shocked that I look at a 50 gram a day carbohydrate is high. To most dietitians, they think that's really low. So, when you think about the reality of the bodily systems that we have, if you poured out all of the blood of an individual who didn't have diabetes, there's only 5 grams of glucose, sugar, in the bloodstream. So when you eat an apple that has 20 grams of carbohydrate, it's going to raise the blood glucose, and your insulin comes out to keep it down. And, there's this whole battle inside to keep the blood sugar low. So in my experience, if you are sedentary, if you're older, then you have to be stricter on the carbs at that 20 gram level. The younger you are, the more active you are, the more carbs you can eat and maintain ketosis or maintain weight loss or whatever your diabetes control. Just think now of what's happening in the U.S. currently. There are gyms and areas that are using keto approaches and low carb approaches, and they can teach a higher level of carbs per day, because when you look at who's going into these gyms, they're relatively young. Remember, the older you are, the less carbs you can have. And they're relatively active. Well, remember, they're going to a gym and they're actually doing activities. So those are the main factors, is the younger you are, the more active you are, the more carbs you can eat. Now, the actual number, I don't know. I would love to have a data set of, just 100 or 500 people and work out the exact regression equation to say, for every year you can have 0.2 grams per day. We just don't have that level of data yet, but it's coming.
Okay, that's great. Oh, well, I was going to ask you, a lot of the talk is about low carb, but I don't hear anyone say specifically low sugar, even though it's for sure implied. So do you have to overcome that in patients' minds? That, okay, I get it, low carb, but you find that they're still having sugar, or the two just go hand in hand and there's never a problem? And do you have patients that are low carb but high sugar, or high sugar but low carb? Is that even possible?
Yeah, so how people are taught about carbohydrates and sugars and starches and foods in general is fascinating. And most of us have kind of a tabula rasa, don't know anything about food and what carbs are. So in the initial instruction that we give, we're really clear that a carbohydrate raises the blood sugar, blood glucose. And carbohydrates are comprised of sugars or starches. They're the same. So a starch gets digested as sugar, raises the blood sugar. A sugar gets digested as sugar, raises the blood sugar. So that's the fundamental teaching that needs to happen early on. Or even in some cases, what I do is I don't even go down, well, I give that information, but I just say, look, stay to these foods on this one piece of paper that I give you and it'll work. So when I go to get my car fixed, I don't really want to know if it's the whatever valve in the gasket here or there. And sometimes the mechanics want to tell me, and if I'm busy, I just want to get my car and leave. So there are people who come to the doctor with that mentality too. Just tell me what to do, what to eat. So we have that. In fact, that was the system that Dr. Atkins used for 30 years in the clinical practice in New York City. And we studied it down at Duke in our clinical trials. And now we use that clinically. So how you teach it is of course very important. And whether you teach at a level of a scientist, a biologist, I do that. Or if I teach at a level of someone who doesn't care about any, even it's a different language. You just put the food that don't raise the blood sugar, they give you great nutrition, and it can work well. But yeah, there's confusion about, is it sugar? Is it starch? When I look on a label, I look at the sugars. No, we look at the total carbohydrates on the labels, because sugar is added into that total carbohydrate level. So, some people want it really simple. Some people want to know the deep dive, and we can connect people to apps and websites and all that. But when the world gets tough or rough or busy, you want to have a simple system that people can fall back on. And that's the understanding that protein comes first. Irregardless of all of the keto hype and all these products, what you want to know is that what we really need is to give ourselves protein at the end of the day. And so that's basic teaching as well.
Okay. Well, very good. So we're kind of out of time. So what are some resources for listeners? You said there's, obviously there is tons of stuff out there. Resources for someone that's just starting, then maybe resources for someone that has been on a keto diet or a keto-S diet and they're having trouble. Maybe a couple suggestions there.
Sure. So just general information, I think worldwide the most popular website is called diet.Dr.com. It's based out of Sweden, and there's a free side and a subscription side, so there's a lot of great information to get started at diet.Dr.com. Our specific work that we've done at Duke, we're scaling up in different ways. One is a clinical program, and there's good information at the website called HEALclinics.com. That's HEALclinics.com. And then Adapt Your Life is another company I'm involved in that makes products that are keto friendly. And there's a lot of great information at that website. There are all sorts of apps and things that I've seen get people in trouble by focusing on eating too much fat rather than keeping the carbs low. And so if the app that you've chosen isn't helping you or it's not working, don't blame the diet for not working. It's how the particular app has been teaching you. And I will take a lot of people from the kind of bio, hacking world to just keeping things simple, and it'll start to work then.
Well, very good. Well, Dr. Westman, I really appreciate you coming on the podcast.
My pleasure. Thank you.
You're listening to the Future Tech Podcast with Richard Jacobs. Future technologies such as artificial intelligence, stem cells, 3D printing, gene editing, Bitcoin, blockchain, the microbiome, quantum computing, virtual reality, and exploring space are much closer than you might think. In fact, many early versions of these technologies are in play right now, and the companies that are using these technologies are the focus of this podcast. My goal for you, the listener, is to learn from these podcasts. You may very well learn something that may change the course of your life for the better, steer you towards a new career, or give you insight into addressing a thorny medical problem. Remember, this podcast and its content is informational in nature only. No medical, tax, legal, financial, or psychological advice is being given. If you've enjoyed the podcast, please listen, subscribe, like, and tell your friends about it. Thank you.